The microwave hummed, a low, monotonous complaint in the quiet of the apartment. I watched the plastic plate of leftover chow mein turn slowly behind the grimy glass. Another turn. Another hum. Outside, the city sighed, a distant wash of traffic and sirens that never really stopped. My fork scraped against the cheap, ceramic plate. The noodles were lukewarm in the center, cold at the edges. I ate them anyway. Food was fuel. That's all it had been for a long time. I pushed the plate away, the greasy residue catching the dim light from the kitchen bulb. My gaze drifted around the room. A stack of mail, mostly bills and junk, sat on the small table. A stain on the linoleum floor from something I'd spilled last week, peeling paint in the corner where the wall met the ceiling. This was my life. A collection of small, neglected failures housed within four walls I couldn't afford. I took a long swallow of tap water that tasted of metal and cursed under my breath. Cursed the job I hated, the city that was swallowing me whole, the face I saw in the mirror every morning, everything since that day. A click. It was soft, barely there. It came from the bedroom. I stopped, my glass halfway to my mouth. I listened. The refrigerator kicked on with a shuddering groan. The traffic outside seemed to get a little louder. I set the glass down. It was nothing. Just the sounds of an old building settling. The groans and sighs of a structure as tired as I was. This shithole, I muttered, the words tasting as bland as the noodles. I scraped the rest of the food into the trash can, the plastic bag crinkling loudly, and rinsed the plate in the sink. The motions were automatic. They required no thought, which was a blessing. Thought was the enemy. Thought led back to the night, to the rain, to the red lights spinning in the dark. I moved from the small kitchen area into the main room, which served as my living room and, beyond a thin wall, my bedroom. My feet were bare on the worn, rough carpet. I needed to sleep. I just needed to make it to the morning. One more night. That was the goal, every day, just get through the night. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room was dark, save for a pale orange rectangle of light cast on the far wall from a streetlight outside. The bed was an unmade mess of sheets. My clothes from the day were in a pile on the floor where I had dropped them. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for one thing. On my pillow, the only pillow on the bed, sat a small toy car. It was placed perfectly in the center, as if on display. It was bright, primary red, a cheap plastic thing, no bigger than my thumb, the kind of thing you'd get out of a gumball machine. The color hit me first. A jolt, sharp and electric, went through my chest. It was the same red, the exact shade of candy apple red as the sedan I was driving. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind refusing to connect the dots. It was a blank wall. It couldn't process the information. A red toy car. On my pillow. What the fuck? The whisper was hoarse. I stepped into the room. My hand went to the light switch, but I hesitated. I didn't want to see it more clearly. I wanted it to be a trick of the light, a shadow, anything else. But my hand had a mind of its own. It flipped the switch. The naked bulb overhead flooded the room with harsh, yellow light. The car was still there. It was offensively real. Its plastic shell gleamed. I walked closer, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs, a heavy, clumsy beat. Where did it come from? I lived alone. I hadn't had a visitor in months. The landlord had a key, but he wouldn't just come in. And he sure as hell wouldn't leave a toy on my pillow. I reached out a trembling hand and picked it up. The plastic was cold. Not cool, but cold, as if it had been sitting in a freezer. The feeling was deeply wrong. It felt slick and unnaturally smooth against my skin. There were no markings, no brand name. Just four black plastic wheels on a cheap metal axle and a body of solid red. My fingers tightened around it. I started looking around the room. Not just looking, but searching, scanning. The initial annoyance was gone, replaced by a cold knot of dread twisting in my stomach. The window was locked from the inside. The closet was open. A dark rectangle full of my few clothes. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except this impossible object in my hand. He must have left it. A neighbor's kid? Slipped in while I was bringing in groceries? No, I locked the door. I always locked the door. I checked it 3 times every time I left, and every time I came home. It was a ritual. A necessity. My first thought was to throw it away. Get it out of my apartment. Out of my sight. I clenched it in my fist, the hard edges digging into my palm, and turned back toward the living room. That's when I heard it. A child's giggle. It wasn't in the room, it wasn't in the hall, it was inside my head. It was a sound that had no source, no direction. It was simply there. A high, clear, bubbling laugh that seemed to vibrate directly against my eardrums. I gasped. A raw, sharp intake of air, and my hands flew up to clap over my ears. The pressure of my palms did nothing. The sound was on the inside. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. Silence. Just the thumping of my own blood. Panic, pure and undiluted, surged through me. I didn't think. I just reacted. I ran. My bare feet slapped against the carpet. I had to get out. Out of the apartment, out of the building, out into the street, where there were other people. I lunged for the front door, my hand closing around the metal knob. It was ice, an unnatural, biting cold that felt like it was leaching the heat from my skin. I recoiled for a second before grabbing it again, desperation overriding the shock. I twisted. It didn't move. The deadbolt was not thrown. I could see the small, silver lever in its horizontal, unlocked position, but the knob itself was frozen solid, as if the mechanism inside had been flash frozen into a single piece of metal. "Come on," I grunted, putting my whole body into it. My feet slipped on the linoleum. The knob wouldn't budge a millimeter. I rattled it, my shoulder slamming against the wood of the door. Nothing. It was sealed. I was locked in. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide, fixed on the unmoving doorknob. My back hit the wall. The rough texture of the plaster scraped against my shirt. I slid down, my legs giving out, until I was sitting on the floor. My breathing was loud and ragged in the small space. "What is happening?" I whispered to the empty air. My eyes darted around the room, searching the shadows for an explanation, for a person, for anything. The only light came from the streetlight outside, filtering through the single dirty window and painting a long, distorted trapezoid on the floor and opposite wall. It cast my shadow there, a tall, hunched figure of black. I watched it, my chest heaving. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe. In that stillness, I saw it. For a single, impossible moment, my shadow on the wall detached from my own movements. As I sat crumpled against the wall, my shadow coiled. It shrank. The long, hunched shape of a grown man pulled in on itself, becoming smaller, shorter. The head became rounder, the limbs shorter. For less than a heartbeat, it was the unmistakable silhouette of a small child. And then, just as quickly, it snapped back, stretching out to once again perfectly mimic my own pathetic form. A sound caught in my throat, a choked sob. I didn't scream. I couldn't. All the air had been punched from my lungs. I stared at the shadow, my own shadow, now a source of absolute terror. It was still, again, a perfect copy. But I had seen it. I knew what I had seen. The enemy wasn't just in the room, it was wearing my own skin. It was cast from my own form. I squeezed my eyes shut and opened them again. The shadow remained still, a dark stain on the wall. I didn't dare move a muscle. I sat there, pinned by fear, listening to the frantic drumming of my own heart. How long I sat there, I don't know. Minutes, an eternity. Eventually, the animal instinct for survival, for a barrier, for a locked door between me and the unknown, took over. I couldn't stay here, in the open with that thing on the wall. The bedroom. The bedroom had a lock, a flimsy interior door lock, but it was something. It was a terrible choice, going back to where it all started, but it was the only choice I had. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming. With a choked cry, I bolted from the wall, a mad dash across the 10 feet of carpet that felt like a mile. I didn't look back at the shadow. I didn't dare. I slammed the bedroom door shut behind me, the cheap wood vibrating in its frame. My trembling fingers fumbled with the small turn lock on the knob. It clicked into place. The sound was small, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I leaned my back against the door, my entire body shaking, gasping for air. My right hand was still clenched shut a fist. I had forgotten. I slowly unfurled my fingers. The red toy car was still there, nestled in my sweaty palm. My hand was shaking so badly it looked like the car was vibrating. My eyes were drawn to it, to the smooth, red surface. My thumb brushed over the underside, feeling for something, anything, and it found it. Not a smooth surface. There were scratches. I brought it closer to my face, my eyes struggling to focus in the dim orange light from the window. They weren't random scratches. They were letters, jagged, uneven, carved into the plastic with something sharp, like a nail or the tip of a compass. Like a child had painstakingly, viciously scraped a message. 5 small words. Play with me. Sleep did not come. It was a shallow, feverish state. A half-conscious dread, punctuated by the image of a small red car, and the memory of a shadow that was not my own. Each creak of the old building was a footstep. Each sigh of the wind outside the window was a whisper. I lay rigid on the mattress, the bedroom door locked, my fist still clenched around the cheap plastic toy, until my knuckles ached. The message scratched into its underbelly was burned into my mind. Play with me. I must have drifted off at some point. A black, dreamless drop into nothing, because the next thing I knew, a dirty gray light was filtering through the window. Morning. The first instinct was relief, a loosening in my chest. Night was over. Monsters, real or imagined, belonged to the dark. I pushed myself up, my back protesting with a series of sharp pains. The air in the room was stale and heavy. The toy car was on the floor where it had fallen from my hand. I stared at it for a long moment before my gaze slid away. I couldn't look at it. My bare feet met the cold floorboards. I unlocked the bedroom door slowly, my breath held tight in my lungs. The main room was just as I had left it. A mess. The trapezoid of streetlight on the floor was gone, replaced by the flat, unforgiving light of day. My shadow was attached to my heels, a normal, boring shadow. Everything looked normal. Annoyingly so. It made last night feel like a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and cheap noodles. That had to be it. I was overworked, underfed, and haunted by things I tried not to think about. My mind was playing tricks on me. I needed to check the front door. The knob. I walked to it, my steps hesitant. I reached out and put my hand on the metal. It was just a doorknob. Room temperature. I turned it. It moved freely. The deadbolt slid back and forth with a smooth, oiled click. I opened the door a few inches, looked out into the empty, peeling hallway and shut it again. It had all been in my head. The cold knob, the shadow, the giggle. It had to be. A wave of exhaustion washed over me so profound it made my knees weak. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. Stress. It had to be stress. The bathroom. I needed to wash my face. I needed the shock of cold water. I needed to see my own reflection and confirm that I was still me, that I was still here. The small room was cramped, the tile under my feet gritty. The air was still and close. I turned the squeaking faucet and leaned over the basin, splashing handfuls of icy water onto my face. It stung. It felt good. It felt real. I did it again, the water dripping from my chin and hair, running in rivulets down my neck. I reached for the toothpaste without looking. My fingers fumbled for the cap, but it wasn't there. I opened my eyes. The tube of toothpaste was lying by the sink, its cap gone. A large, careless dollop had been squeezed out onto the stained porcelain. I stared at it. I live by routine. A grim, joyless routine, but a routine nonetheless. Cap off, brush. Cap on. Always. I never left the cap off. I must have. I started to say aloud, the words dying in my throat. I must have done it last night, in my state. Maybe I was sleepwalking. The thought was unsettling, but it was better than the alternative. It was an explanation. I grabbed the toothbrush. I bent over the sink to wet the brush, keeping my eyes down. I didn't want to look in the mirror just yet. I wasn't ready. The bristles were wet, already damp. I stopped, the brush hovering over the running water. I hadn't used it yet. I slowly raised my head. My eyes met my own in the medicine cabinet mirror. My face was pale, drawn. Dark circles hung under my eyes like bruises. It was my face. I watched it for a second, 2 seconds. I took a breath. My reflection did not. For what felt like an eternity, but could only have been a splinter of a second. The man in the mirror remained perfectly still. His chest did not rise. His eyes, fixed on mine, did not blink. And then, as my own eyes widened in a dawning horror, The reflection's head lifted, a fraction of an inch slower than my own movement. It moved with a sickening, liquid quality, a puppet mimicking its master a moment too late. And the mouth. My mouth was a slack line of shock. The reflection's mouth was curled, just at one corner, into a tight, knowing smirk. A strangled noise escaped my throat. I blinked, a hard, violent motion, as if trying to clear an image burned onto my retinas. I looked again. The face was mine. It was normal. It was breathing when I breathed, its expression a perfect mirror of my own terror. It was a trick of the light. A figment of a mind on the edge. It had to be. I was losing it. The thought offered no comfort. That's when I heard the whisper. It wasn't a sound that came from the hallway, or from outside. It was a voice that manifested directly beside my right ear, as if someone were leaning in to share a secret. The air there suddenly felt cold. It was my own voice, but it was wrong. It was thin, high, and devoid of any emotion, like a recording of a child trying to sound like a man. Aren't we having fun? I didn't scream. There was no air for it. My body reacted on its own, a spasm of pure animal panic. I threw myself backward, away from the voice, away from the mirror. My back slammed into the flimsy bathroom door, my feet scrabbling for purchase on the tiled floor. I fumbled for the knob, my hand shaking too badly to get a grip. My fingers finally closed around it. I wrenched the door open, stumbled out into the main room, and slammed it shut behind me. My hand found the lock on the knob, that cheap little push-button thing. I jammed it in. The click was loud in the sudden quiet of the apartment. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my chest heaving. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I was trapped in here. The front door was locked, and now something was in the bathroom. Or my mind was inventing it. Which was worse? S-H, H, 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 H. The sound was sudden and deafening in the small space. It was the shower. It hadn't trickled on. It had blasted to life, a full, roaring torrent of water beating against the inside of the tub. It was a real sound. A physical, undeniable sound. Someone was in there. Someone had turned on my shower. The knot of fear in my stomach twisted into something sharp and hot. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide and fixed on it, as if I could see through the wood. The roar of the water was a constant, violent noise. I couldn't think. I couldn't process. W-H-U-M. The door shuddered in its frame. My heart leaped into my throat. The sound was a dull, heavy impact. A fist. Or a shoulder. Something hitting the door from the inside. W-H-U-M. Again. Harder this time. A fine shower of dust and paint chips fell from the top of the doorframe. The wood groaned. I kept backing away, my feet clumsy, my hands held up in front of me as if to ward off a blow. This wasn't in my head. This was real. This was happening. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything. My gaze fell on the corner by my bedroom door. My old wooden baseball bat, coated in a layer of dust, was leaning there. A relic from a time when I had friends, when I played in a work league, before the accident. Before everything. W-H-U-M. A crack appeared. A jagged, vertical split right down the center of the door's cheap hollow panel. Wood splintered outwards. That was it. The last thread of denial snapped. I wasn't going crazy. I was being hunted. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through the panic. I lunged for the baseball bat, my hand closing around the worn grip. It felt heavy and solid in my hands. Real. I held it up, my knuckles white. I was shaking, but the bat was steady. "Who are you?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What do you want? Get the fuck out of my house!" The words echoed in the small room, competing with the roar of the shower. And then, silence. The banging stopped. The shower cut off. The sudden absence of sound was more shocking than the noise itself. It left a ringing in my ears. The only sound now was a soft, rhythmic dripping. Drip, drip, Drip. Water from the showerhead hitting the floor of the tub. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the bat held ready. My entire body was a coiled spring of tension. I listened. Nothing. Not a breath. Not a footstep. It was as if the person, the thing inside, had simply vanished. Minutes passed. The dripping continued its steady, maddening rhythm. My arms began to ache from the weight of the bat. Slowly, cautiously, I began to move. One step at a time, my bare feet making no sound on the worn carpet. I approached the bathroom door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to know. I had to see. I stopped a foot away from the door, craning my neck to see the crack. It was about half an inch wide at its center. I held my breath and leaned in, pressing my eye to the splintered opening. My view was narrow, restricted. I could see the edge of the sink, a patch of white tile wall, and most of the medicine cabinet mirror. The room was empty. The shower curtain was pulled back. There was no one there. The mirror was fogged over with steam from the hot water. It was a milky, opaque surface. As I watched, a line began to form in the condensation. It was being drawn from the inside. A slow, deliberate stroke, as if from a single finger clearing the steam. I watched, mesmerized, unable to move, unable to breathe. A letter appeared. I. Then another next to it. M. A space. Then another letter. T-E-E. My mind went blank. T. It wasn't a name I knew. The finger continued to write, the lines dark against the pale fog. Y-O-U-R-A, new word began on the line below. F-R-I-E-N-D. The finger lifted. The message was complete, hanging there in the steam. I'm T-E-E. Your friend. The message on the mirror hung in the air, the words dissolving slowly as the steam cooled. My knuckles were white around the baseball bat. My grip was the only thing that felt certain. The dripping from the showerhead was a steady count, a clock marking time in a room where time had stopped. Drip! Drip! The message was gone. The mirror was just a mirror, showing a smeary, distorted version of the hallway behind me. It wasn't a person. People don't vanish. People don't turn on showers without making a sound. People don't write on the inside of a fogged-up mirror from a locked room. My legs moved before my mind did. I backed away from the bathroom door, my eyes fixed on the crack in the wood. I reached my own bedroom door, fumbled behind me for the knob, and half fell inside. I slammed it shut. The bat clattered to the floor. My hands shook as I turned the lock. I looked around the small, bare room. The bed. The window. A cheap, wooden chair. I grabbed the chair and wedged its back under the doorknob. It wasn't much, but it was another layer of wood and metal between me and whatever was outside. I checked the window. The latch was secure. I stood in the center of the room, breathing in short, sharp gasps. My chest ached. I needed sleep, not the half-lidded, listening state from the night before. I needed a clean, dark, empty sleep, an off switch for my own brain. The bottle was in the nightstand drawer, next to a book I'd never finished. Sleeping pills. I shook 2 into my palm, then a third. My throat was dry. I didn't have any water. I didn't care. I tossed them to the back of my tongue and swallowed, the sharp edges scratching all the way down. Just need to sleep, I whispered to the empty room. Just one good sleep and it'll be okay. I pulled off my shirt and jeans, my muscles sore from tension. I crawled under the single thin blanket, my back to the door. I faced the wall. I closed my eyes. The pills were a lead weight in my stomach. I focused on that feeling. I waited for the blackness to come and take me. The rain was the first thing. A hard, relentless drumming on the car roof. The windshield wipers scraped back and forth. A rhythmic, hypnotic squeal. Backquote, squeak thump. Squeak thump. Backquote. I was behind the wheel. My hands were gripping it at 10 and 2. The worn leather felt slick under my palms. Dark road. Trees like skeletons lashing in the wind. The glare of the headlights cut a tunnel through the night. The accident. I was here again. But this time was different. I wasn't alone. The passenger seat was no longer empty. A boy sat there, small for his age, maybe 10 or 11. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans. his bare feet propped up on the dashboard. He wasn't wet from the rain. He was just there. In the strobing light of the dashboard, I could see his face. A pale, lean face with my eyes, my nose, and a tight, knowing smirk that didn't belong on a child. T. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, down the cone of light our headlights carved from the darkness. He pointed a thin finger toward the windshield. "Hit him," he said. The voice was mine, but pitched higher, thinner. It had no echo. It was a thought spoken aloud. I looked where he was pointing. A shape was emerging from the trees at the edge of the road. Another child, smaller than the one beside me. A flash of a red rain jacket. A kid running out into the road. "No," I heard myself say, a dry rasp. I tried to turn the wheel. My hands were locked. My muscles screamed, but my arms were disconnected from my will. They were stone. The car continued its straight, unyielding path forward. "Do it," T said, his voice level. The smirk widened. "You have to." The child in the red jacket was in the center of the headlights now, frozen, its face a white smear of shock. I fought against my own body. I pulled, I strained, I threw all my weight into turning the wheel, but it was like trying to bend iron. My knuckles were bone white. The car did not swerve. It did not slow down. Backquote. Squeak thump. Backquote. The wipers cleared a sheet of water from the glass. The red jacket filled the entire view. Then the sound. A heavy, wet thud that was not part of the storm. The sound of something soft meeting something hard at 50 miles an hour. The hood of the car buckled. The windshield fractured into 1,000 glittering spiderwebs. The dream didn't end. It shifted. The sound of the rain and the engine were gone. I was standing on the shoulder of the road. The car was a mangled shape behind me, its one remaining headlight pointing crookedly into the trees. Everything was still. A small, warm hand slipped into mine. It was T. He stood beside me, looking back at the wreckage. He didn't seem to notice the broken glass or the twisted metal. He leaned in close, his voice a cold whisper directly in my ear. "Run," he said. "Nobody saw. They'll never know. We're the same, you and me." He started to pull me away, back down the dark road. I tried to pull free. I needed to go back. I needed to see. But his grip was impossibly strong. He dragged me. My feet stumbled on the uneven shoulder, and then I was on my knees. I fell forward onto my chest. "Get up," he said. I couldn't. He didn't wait. He just kept pulling. My body was an anchor he was dragging behind him. The world became a blur of motion and texture. My cheeks scraped against the wet, broken asphalt. The sharp edges of gravel bit into my arms, my chest, my back. I could feel my t-shirt bunching up, then tearing. The road surface was like a coarse file, sanding away my skin. A hot, abrasive pain flared across my shoulders and down the length of my right arm. It wasn't dream pain. It was real. I could feel every jagged stone, every sharp piece of grit digging into me, tearing lines of fire across my flesh. I could hear the sound of my own skin scraping against the road, a wet, tearing sound. I tried to scream, but the air was filled with the smell of wet earth and tar, and my throat could make no noise. T's small hand was locked around my wrist, pulling me on and on into the endless, dark road. The pain was everything. The burning, the scraping, the shredding. It was my entire world. I woke with a gasp, my body lurching upward. My lungs burned. My heart hammered a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I was in my bed. My room. Sunlight, bright and sharp, streamed through the window, cutting a clean rectangle of light on the far wall. The chair was still wedged under the door. The room was silent. "A dream," I choked out, the words raw in my throat. My face was wet. My entire body was slick with sweat, the thin blanket tangled around my legs. It was just a dream. The relief was a physical thing, a loosening in my chest that almost made me dizzy. I sat up on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, waiting for my breathing to slow down. A sharp, stinging sensation shot up my right arm. I flinched. It wasn't the dull ache of a nightmare. It was a hot, specific pain, like a bad sunburn. I looked down at my forearm. It was covered in dirt. And blood. My breath caught. I slowly, carefully turned my arm over. From my elbow to my wrist, The skin was a mess of long, parallel scrapes. They were angry and red, oozing a clear fluid beaded with blood. Tiny black specks of gravel were embedded in the raw flesh. I scrambled off the bed, my legs unsteady. A new wave of pain, hotter and wider, flared across my back. It felt exactly like the dragging, the friction, the burning. I stumbled to the full-length mirror, screwed to the back of the closet door. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grab the hem of my undershirt. I pulled it up, over my head. I turned, and I saw it. It was not a dream. From my right shoulder blade down to the waistband of my boxers, my back was a ruin, a crosshatch of raw, weeping flesh. The scrapes were long and vicious, some deeper than others, perfectly matching the contours of a body being dragged over rough ground. The skin was shredded, peeled back in places, dark with dried blood and grime. I could see the road in the wounds. I could feel the asphalt and the pain that pulsed from them, with every beat of my heart. I stood there, staring at the reflection of my own mangled back. The bright, clear morning light left no room for shadows, no room for tricks. The wounds were there. They were real. The dream had followed me out of sleep. It had reached into my room, into my bed, and it had left its marks on my body. The sting of antiseptic was a clean, sharp fire. It was better than the dull, gritty ache. I stood hunched over the bathroom sink, a bottle of peroxide in one hand, a wad of cotton balls in the other. I had managed to clean the scrapes on my arm. The task had been simple, mechanical. Douse, wipe, wince. Douse, wipe, wince. Each time the foam fizzled white over the raw trenches in my skin, it was a small, satisfying confirmation. This is real. This hurts. The back was a different problem. I couldn't see it, not properly. Only the horrifying reverse image in the closet mirror. I couldn't reach most of it. I twisted my body, my arm reaching over my shoulder, dabbing blindly at the torn skin. A jolt of pain shot through me, hot and electric. My muscles seized. I dropped the cotton ball. It fell to the tile floor, leaving a small pink smear. It was useless. I had to get out of here. The thought wasn't a plan, just an impulse, a survival reflex. The four walls of the apartment were pressing in. Every shadow was a waiting shape. The drip from the kitchen faucet was a countdown. The air was thick with the memory of the dream, of the impossible wounds, of the words on the mirror. I pulled on a clean shirt. The soft cotton felt like sandpaper against my back. I hissed in a breath through my teeth, my whole body rigid for a moment. I chose the loosest shirt I owned, a gray thing, old and worn thin. Even then, the simple act of getting dressed was an exercise in pain. I found my keys on the counter, right where I'd left them. They felt cold and heavy in my palm. Solid. I needed solid. I needed concrete and sunlight and the noise of strangers. I opened the front door. The lock made a loud, definitive click as it turned. The hallway was empty. A long, dim corridor lit by a single flickering fluorescent panel in the ceiling. The air smelled of dust and old cooking. It was normal. I took a step out, pulling the door closed behind me until it was just slightly ajar. I stood there, just breathing. In. Out. The air was no fresher out here, but it was different. It wasn't the air from my apartment. That was enough. Good morning. The voice made me jump. My head snapped to the left. A woman was standing there, by the door opposite mine. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with soft, gray-white hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a simple house dress with a faded floral pattern and a white apron dusted with flour. She was holding a blue ceramic plate, covered with a paper napkin. She smiled, a gentle expression that crinkled the skin around her eyes. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," she said. Her voice was warm. "I'm Martha Gable. I just moved into 4B a few weeks ago. I don't think we've been properly introduced." I just stared. My mind was scrambling to catch up. A neighbor. Just a neighbor. My heart was still hammering against my ribs from the surprise. I forced my mouth to work. "Leo," I said. The name felt strange on my tongue. "I'm in 4A. "A pleasure, Leo," she said, her smile unwavering. She held the plate out to me. "I was doing some baking to christen the new oven. Made far too many. Please, take one. Or two. They're blueberry muffins." I looked at the plate, then back at her face. Her eyes were a pale, clear blue. There was nothing there but simple kindness. A part of my brain, the logical part that felt very far away, told me to just be normal. Say thank you. Take the muffin. You look tired, son, she said, her voice dropping a little with concern. Everything all right? The question hung in the air. I could feel the thin cotton of my shirt sticking to the weeping wounds on my back. I could feel the burn on my forearm. I saw the fractured windshield. I heard the wet thud. The door to my apartment was still cracked open. A slice of the dark interior was visible behind me. Mrs. Gable's eyes flickered past my shoulder toward the opening. A small, pleasant frown touched her lips. Are you babysitting? I thought I heard a little one in there this morning. Such a happy sound, a child's laughter. The air in the hallway turned to ice. My blood ran cold. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. A child's laughter. This morning. While I was asleep. While I was being dragged down that black, asphalt road. I could feel a tremor start in my hands. My nephew, I lied. The word came out rough. I cleared my throat. My sister dropped him off early. He's a handful. Liar. The voice was not my own. It was a thought, but sharp and clear, like a needle in my brain. It was T's voice. High, cold, and certain. She heard us. She knows. Oh, how lovely, Mrs. Gable said, oblivious. I have grandchildren myself, 3 of them. They're a storm, but a wonderful one. She took a step closer, her gaze friendly but direct. Her eyes dropped to my arm, where the sleeve of my shirt had ridden up slightly, exposing the angriest of the red scrapes. Goodness, you've had a nasty fall. You should put some salve on that. Her finger, tipped with a clean, short-filed nail, lifted as if to point. It stopped an inch from my skin. The gesture was innocent, a grandmother's worry. But I wasn't seeing a grandmother. I was seeing an interrogator, an observer, a witness. Her eyes, they weren't just looking. They were scanning, cataloging. The dark circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands, the scratch on my arm, the lie about the nephew. She's looking for things. For evidence. The police send people like her. They pretend to be nice. They ask questions. They look. T's voice was louder now. Not a whisper. A statement of fact. It wasn't in my head anymore. It felt like it was coming from just behind my ear. I could almost feel the cold breath of the words. She saw the mirror. She knows what you did. She'll tell them you did it again. Look at her eyes. She's looking for the blood. I started sweating. A cold film broke out across my forehead and the back of my neck. I could feel a single drop of sweat trace a path down my spine, a cold trail that made the raw skin on my back scream in protest. My gaze darted from her eyes to her mouth, to the plate of muffins, then back to her eyes. She was still smiling, but the smile looked different now. It didn't reach her eyes. It was a mask. A tool. You should get back to your nephew, she was saying. Can't leave a little one alone for too long. The way she said little one sent a shockwave through me. It was too specific. Too close. That was his name for himself sometimes. The little one. Get rid of her. Now. Before she calls them. Push her. Lock the door. My breathing was shallow. The hallway felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. The fluorescent light above buzzed, an angry insect sound drilling into my ears. Mrs. Gable was still standing there, holding out the plate. An offering. A trap. Is something wrong, dear? She asked. Her smile finally faltered. A line of genuine confusion appeared between her brows. The concern on her face was the final trigger. It was a lie. A performance. It had to be. No one could be this nice. Not now. Not to me. The world wasn't a nice place. I couldn't take it anymore. The pressure in my skull, the buzzing light, the silent screaming from T, the awful, knowing kindness in her eyes. It all had to stop. My hand shot out, but not to take the muffin. It slapped against the flat surface of my apartment door. What are you looking at? The voice that came out of my throat was unrecognizable. It was a low, guttural snarl. A cornered animal's sound. Mrs. Gable flinched back, her eyes wide with shock. The plate trembled in her hands. The smile was gone, replaced by a mask of fear and bewilderment. "Get away from my door," I growled. "Stop looking at me. Stop asking questions. Just mind your own goddamn business." I didn't wait for a response. I yanked the door inward and slammed it shut. The sound was a physical blow, a crack of thunder that shook the frame and echoed down the empty hallway. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home was the final punctuation. Silence. I stood with my back pressed against the wood, my forehead resting on the cool surface. My chest heaved. I was panting, sucking in air that did nothing to calm the frantic, painful beating of my heart. The entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than 2 minutes, but I felt exhausted, as if I'd run a marathon. The silence on the other side of the door was absolute. I could imagine her standing there, stunned. I could picture her face. The look of fear. I felt a pang of something sour and ugly in my gut. Guilt. But underneath it there was a flood of relief. A powerful cleansing wave of it. The threat was gone. The eyes were gone. I was safe. I was alone again. "Good," T's voice said, calm and satisfied now. "She won't be back. We're safe now." My legs felt weak. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. My eyes fell on my hands. I was still holding it. The plate. I must have taken it from her in that last, frantic moment, a reflex I didn't even register. It was a simple blue ceramic plate. On it sat 3 perfectly browned blueberry muffins. A paper napkin was tucked beside them. The smell of sugar and warm fruit filled the air around me. It was the smell of a home, a normal life, a world I had just slammed the door on. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten. I picked up a muffin. It was still warm. I broke it in half. Steam rose from the soft, purple-streaked interior. I took a bite. It tasted like heaven, sweet and real and solid. I ate another bite, then another, devouring the whole thing in seconds. I picked up the second one and did the same. It was an act of pure, desperate hunger. Only one muffin was left. It sat in the center of the plate. I reached for it, and my fingers brushed against something under the paper napkin. A small piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. It was tucked between the last muffin and the plate itself. My hand froze. My heart, which had just started to slow, kicked back into a frantic rhythm. Slowly, I lifted the muffin. There it was. A small square of paper, torn from a notepad. On it, written in thick, clumsy red crayon, were 3 words. The letters were wobbly and uneven, like a child trying to stay within invisible lines. The pressure of the crayon was so hard, it had nearly torn through the paper. The message read, "She is mean." The message burned into my vision. The red crayon was thick, greasy. It looked like blood. I sat on the floor, the plate heavy in my lap. The last muffin sat next to the note, a perfect, innocent-looking thing. My throat was tight. My stomach, full of the first 2 muffins, now felt like a sack of stones. The smell of sugar and blueberries was gone. All I could smell was the waxy scent of the crayon. "She is mean." He wrote this, T. He was in my head, but he wrote this. His clumsy, childish letters. He had been here. He had been with me in the hallway. He had judged her. He had sentenced her. The note wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. My breath hitched. The plate started to shake in my hands. I set it down on the floor carefully, as if it were a bomb. I pushed myself up, using the door for support. My legs were weak. My back screamed as the fabric of my shirt scraped against the raw skin. I ignored it. A new fire was burning, hotter and deeper. I had to find him. Not in my mind. In the real world. He had a physical presence. He could touch things. He could leave notes. He had to be tied to something. An object. A place. A memory I had buried so deep that it had rotted and spawned this thing. I started in the living room. I didn't have a plan. I just moved. I tore the cushions off the sofa, my fingers digging into the crevices, searching for anything. A lost toy. A drawing. A relic from a past I couldn't remember clearly. I found loose change, a pen, and a crust of old popcorn. Nothing. I emptied the bookshelf. Books crashed to the floor, spines cracking. I shook each one, pages flapping wildly, hoping something would fall out. A pressed flower, a forgotten photograph. Nothing. My movements grew more frantic. I overturned the coffee table. A glass lamp shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and violent in the quiet apartment. I didn't flinch. The sound was a relief, a punctuation to the noise in my head. "Where are you?" I said, the words a low rasp. I was talking to the empty room. to the shadows in the corners. What are you? My search became a rampage. I tore through the kitchen, yanking open drawers, their contents clattering, utensils, junk mail, rubber bands. In the bedroom, I pulled my clothes from the closet, throwing them into a pile on the floor. I ripped the sheets from the bed. I looked under the mattress. Nothing. It was all just my life. A boring, empty life. Nothing from a childhood. Nothing that wasn't mine. Then I remembered. The attic. There was a square panel in the ceiling of the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. A string hung from its center. I hadn't touched it since I moved in. The landlord had said it was just for storage. Empty, he'd claimed. A place for dust and insulation to gather. I dragged a chair from the kitchen, the legs scraping against the floorboards. I climbed onto it, my body unsteady. The chair wobbled. I reached up and pulled the string. A cloud of ancient dust rained down, making me cough. It smelled of dry rot and dead things. With a groan of old wood, a folding ladder descended from the dark square. The air that drifted down was cold. Colder than the apartment. It was a dead, still air. I stood on the chair for a moment, listening. There was no sound from up there. Just the dark. I needed a light. I grabbed a utility lighter from the kitchen junk drawer, the kind used for grills, and a flashlight. Back on the chair, I took a breath and started to climb. The wooden rungs of the ladder protested under my weight. Each step was a loud creak that echoed in the hallway below. I pushed my head and shoulders through the opening. Darkness. Absolute. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut a clean white circle through the black. It illuminated a world of wood and dust. Rough-hewn rafters angled up into a pointed roof high above. The floor was made of wide, unfinished planks. It wasn't empty. Against the far wall, shrouded in thick, web-like sheets of dust, were several cardboard boxes. I pulled myself the rest of the way up, my sneakers landing on the dusty floor with a soft thud. The air was thick, hard to breathe. I swept the flashlight beam across the space. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, hung from the rafters. The beam landed on the boxes. They were my boxes. From my parents' house. After I'd forgotten they were even here. I had just told the movers to put them anywhere. This was it. If he was tied to anything, it would be in here. In the wreckage of my childhood. I walked over to the boxes, my footsteps muffled by the layer of dust. I reached for the nearest one, my fingers sinking into the soft, decaying cardboard. I pulled it towards me. The word photos was written on the side in my mother's neat cursive. My heart hammered. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and placed the box in front of me. The flashlight beam rested on it, a spotlight on a forgotten stage. My hands were shaking as I pulled open the top flaps. The smell of old paper and developing chemicals filled the air. The box was full, hundreds of glossy squares and rectangles. I reached in and pulled out a stack. The top photo was me, maybe 4 or 5, sitting on a bright green lawn, a birthday cake with cartoon characters in front of me. I looked happy. It felt like looking at a stranger. I put it aside. I worked methodically, going through them one by one. Me on a swing set. Me on a bicycle with training wheels. Me at the beach, covered in sand. A lifetime of smiles. I was looking for something else. A clue. A friend in the background. A shadow that didn't belong. Nothing. It was just me. Always me. I just wanted to see a normal picture. I just wanted to find a piece of a life that wasn't broken. My fingers brushed against a larger photo, an 8x10. It was thicker than the others. I pulled it out. The color was slightly faded, the corners soft with age. It was me. I recognized the red and white checkered shirt. I must have been 7, maybe 8. I had a gap in my teeth where my front tooth had fallen out. I was grinning, a huge, unrestrained smile of pure joy. I was standing in a park. Trees were out of focus in the background. My right arm was extended, slung around something. Someone. My hand was curved, resting on a shoulder that wasn't there. I was posing with empty space. I stared at the glossy surface. At my younger self, so happy. At the empty air beside me. My fingers on the non-existent shoulder. The space next to me wasn't just empty. It was shaped by my presence. The way my body leaned, the way my arm was crooked. I was interacting with it. With him. A sound whispered through the attic. It was thin, high-pitched, like air leaking from a balloon. It took me a second to realize it was a voice. See, we've been friends for a long, long time. The voice didn't come from my head. It wasn't a thought. It felt like it was rising from the photograph itself, coiling out of the faded colors like heat off pavement. My blood turned to ice. A tremor started in my hand, so violent that the photograph shook. My fingers lost their grip. The photo fell from my hand. It struck the edge of the cardboard box. The box tipped. It happened in slow motion. The overloaded container leaned, hesitated, and then tumbled over. An avalanche of pictures spilled out, cascading across the dusty floorboards. They fanned out around me. A river of lost moments. Hundreds of glossy squares all face up catching the beam of my flashlight. Everywhere I looked, it was the same. Me, on a swing set, pushing the empty swing next to me, my face alight with laughter. Me, at a picnic table, holding a carton of juice with 2 straws in it, one for me, one for the empty space on the bench. Me, in my childhood bedroom, sitting on the floor with a board game between us, my hand moving a little red piece for an opponent who wasn't there. He wasn't new. He wasn't from the accident. He had always been there. The sight broke something inside me. A dam of denial burst. This wasn't a ghost. This was a cancer that had been growing inside me my whole life. I scrambled back, away from the flood of images, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My back hit the rough wood of a rafter. I couldn't get away. My own life was surrounding me, choking me. I saw the first photo again, the one that started it. Me, with the gap-toothed smile and my arm around nothing. The source. The beginning. I had to destroy it. My hand fumbled for the utility lighter I'd set down beside me. My fingers were slick with sweat. I finally got a grip on it. I pointed it at the photograph. I squeezed the trigger. A long blue flame shot out with a soft whoosh. I held the flame to the corner of the picture. The glossy paper curled, turned black, and then caught fire. A small orange flame began to eat away at my smiling face. As the fire consumed the image of my younger self, a sound filled the attic. It was a scream. Not human. It was high and piercing. An agonizing shriek of electronic feedback and tearing metal that drilled directly into my ears. It didn't echo. It vibrated in the bones of my skull. So loud it was a physical pressure. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to stop it. The scream was inside me. The attic went black. The flashlight, the flame from the lighter, everything was extinguished. The scream cut off, leaving behind a ringing silence and the smell of burnt plastic. I was on my hands and knees in the total darkness. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. The air was gone. Seconds passed. Or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Then, with a flicker and a low hum, the single bare bulb hanging from a wire in the center of the attic sputtered to life. The light was weak, yellow, and swinging slightly, casting long, dancing shadows across the rafters. I was still there. The flashlight lay on its side a few feet away, its light dead. The lighter was in my right hand. In front of me, on the floor, was a small pile of gray ash and a blackened curl of unburnt photo paper. It was over. The photo was gone. A sharp, searing pain bloomed in my left palm. I gasped, my attention snapping from the ashes to my hand. I slowly uncurled my fingers. The palm was slick with sweat. In the center of it, angry and white against the reddening skin, was a fresh blister. The skin was raised and tight. I brought it closer to my face in the dim, yellow light. The burn wasn't a random shape. It was perfectly formed. 5 small, distinct circles at the top, connected to a wider patch of blistered skin below. It was the shape of a tiny hand pressed into my flesh. The yellow light from the bare bulb swung back and forth, a slow, hypnotic pendulum carving arcs of shadow and weak illumination across the attic. My knees were pressed into the gritty dust and the small, gray pile of ash that used to be a photograph. My left hand was a furnace. The skin was tight, screaming a high, thin note of pain that vibrated up my arm. I stared at the shape blistered into my palm, a child's handprint. Small, perfectly formed and white-hot. I lowered myself down the folding ladder, my body moving with a stiff, disconnected motion. Each step sent a jolt from my palm up to my shoulder. My feet met the hallway floor. I did not pull the string to close the hatch. I left the square of darkness open above me, a wound in the ceiling. The faint yellow glow from the swinging bulb spilled down, just enough to light my way. My apartment was a wreck. Books and papers littered the living room floor. The shattered lamp lay like a broken skeleton. I walked through the debris, my gaze fixed forward. In the kitchen, I ran the cold tap. The water was a shock as it hit my palm. I hissed, pulling my hand back. The clear, angry fluid in the blisters wobbled. I found gauze and antiseptic in the bathroom cabinet. Cleaning the burn was a focused, methodical agony. I wrapped the gauze tightly around my hand, the white bandage a clean, stark contrast to the grime under my fingernails. I needed noise. I needed to fill the space. I sank onto the sofa, my back protesting, and fumbled for the remote. The television screen flickered to life. A man with a perfect smile was selling a car. I pressed the volume up button again and again, until the commercial's cheerful jingle was loud, aggressive. It was a shield. A wall of sound to keep everything else out. The jingle ended. A different theme started, more serious. The screen showed a news anchor at a desk. "And we continue our local coverage," she said, her voice smooth and professional, "with a story of escalating neighborhood concern. A series of unsettling incidents in the Westlake apartment complex has residents on edge." I watched, my good hand picking at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. The name was familiar. My building. The screen cut to a reporter standing outside in the daylight. Behind her was the brick facade of my building. My stomach muscles tightened. "Jean, what we're seeing here is a pattern," the reporter said. "What began as minor annoyances has now escalated into what residents are calling targeted harassment." My eyes were glued to the screen. I couldn't look away. I was leaning forward, the wrapped hand cradled in my lap. The screen showed a close-up of a shattered ceramic gnome. Then it cut to a shot of a doormat, slashed and torn. These were things I had seen. In the hallways. On the landings. I had dismissed them. Annoying kids. Petty frustrations. The reporter turned. "We spoke to one resident who has been a target of the most recent and most disturbing incident." The camera panned to an older woman. Her face was pale, her hair a mess of gray curls. It was Mrs. Henderson, from 3B. The woman I'd passed in the hall just yesterday. The woman T had judged. Her hands were twisting a handkerchief over and over. She looked terrified. Someone. "They came in the night," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I heard a sound, like a can being shaken. I didn't think anything of it. "But this morning," she trailed off, shaking her head. The camera moved to her front door. My breath caught in my throat. Splashed across the clean white paint of her door, in thick, dripping letters, was a message. It was written in a violent, angry red. It looked like the crayon scrawl on my muffin plate, but magnified, adult-sized. The letters were jagged, hurried. "Don't peek." Underneath the words was a crude drawing, a circle with an X through it, a symbol for an eye crossed out. "It's just awful," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice breaking. "Who would do such a thing? Who could be so full of hate?" I sat there, frozen. I had a glass of water on the floor beside the sofa, from before I'd gone up to the attic. My hand, the one that wasn't burned, reached for it. My fingers were clumsy. They knocked the glass over. Water spread across the hardwood floor, a dark, spreading stain. I didn't even register the sound of it tipping. My gaze was locked on the television, on the red paint. On the message, a verdict. A sentence carried out. The smell of aerosol paint filled my memory. A ghost in the air. My head swam. I pushed myself up from the sofa and stumbled toward the kitchen for a paper towel, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I was on autopilot, trying to clean the water, trying to do something normal, something that made sense. I knelt down, sopping up the spill. As I leaned forward, my eyes fell on my shoes. They were the same work boots I'd worn all day, the same ones I'd worn into the attic. There was a smear on the side of the thick rubber sole of my right boot, a small blotch of color. It wasn't dust. It wasn't mud. It was red. A bright, chemical red. The exact shade of the paint on Mrs. Henderson's door. I stared at the spot. It was no bigger than my thumbnail. But it was there. Real. My mind was a blank wall. I had no memory of being in the hallway. No memory of holding a spray can. No memory of painting those words. I remembered the note. I remembered the rage. I remembered tearing my apartment apart. I remembered the attic. The photos. the fire, the burn. The rest was a hole, a black, empty space where time had been. A thought slid into my head. It came with a feeling of childish satisfaction, a smug pride. It wasn't my voice. It was his. I warned her. I protected you. The thought was so clear, so distinct from my own panic, that I physically recoiled. I scrambled back from the shoes, skidding on the wet floor, until my back hit the kitchen cabinets. I wasn't wondering who T was anymore. The question was changing, twisting into something far more monstrous. What had I done? My body? My hands? My feet? What had they done while I was gone? A sound cut through the noise in my head. Knock, knock, knock. Hard, sharp, official. It came from my front door. It wasn't a friendly rap. It was a demand. My blood felt like it had turned to slush. I stayed frozen on the kitchen floor, listening. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Knock, knock, knock. This time, a voice followed. Mr. Davies, this is the police. We need to speak with you for a moment. Could you please open the door? Police. They were here. For me. Slowly, as if moving through water, I got to my feet. The apartment seemed to tilt around me. I crept out of the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. The knocking stopped. A low murmur of voices came through the door. I held my breath, straining to hear. A man's voice, calm and deep. And a woman's voice, high-pitched and frightened. Mrs. Henderson. My hand trembled as I reached for the peephole. I put my eye to the cool metal. The fisheye lens warped the hallway into a distorted tunnel. Standing there were two uniformed officers. Next to them, clutching her handkerchief, was Mrs. Henderson. She wasn't looking at the officers. She was looking directly at my door. At the peephole. Her eyes were wide with a fear that was personal. Specific. My brain screamed. T did it. It wasn't me. Tell them. It was him. He's the one. He's in my head. He painted the door. He wrote the note. The words were a silent, frantic chant. An excuse. A desperate prayer. But I knew how it would sound. I knew what they would see. A man babbling about an imaginary friend. They would think I was insane. Or worse, that I was lying. I backed away from the door. My heel hit something hard. A wooden baseball bat, left leaning in the corner by the coat rack from a summer league I played in years ago. My hand, the good one, closed around the smooth, worn wood. The weight was solid, real. My knuckles were white. The wrapped, burnt hand throbbed in time with my pulse. I was shaking, a fine tremor that started in my legs and worked its way up my spine. I was an animal in a trap, poised to lash out. Mr. Davies? The cop's voice again, louder this time. We know you're in there. Your television is on. We just want to ask you a few questions about an incident with your neighbor. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I stood in the middle of my wrecked living room, gripping the bat, staring at the door. I could hear them talking to each other in low tones. One of them spoke into his radio. I caught fragments. No answer. Possible, unwilling. I waited. Every second stretched into an eternity. The air was thick. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down my temples. Finally, I heard the heavy sigh of one of the officers. All right, we'll be back, he called out. I'd advise you to cooperate, Mr. Davies. I heard their footsteps moving away down the hall. I heard the ding of the elevator. They were gone. For now. A wave of something. Not relief. It was too acidic for that. Washed over me. I leaned the bat against the wall, my arm weak. I stood there in the silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Then, a new sound. A soft, hesitant footstep outside my door. It was her. She hadn't left with them. Her voice came through the wood of the door. It wasn't loud. It was frayed with fear and a terrible wounded confusion. I saw you, Kevin. My name. She used my name. It felt like a punch to the gut. Last night, she continued, her voice trembling, I looked through my peephole. I saw you standing there, in the hallway, with the spray can. I saw your face. A pause. I could hear her take a shaky breath. Why, Kevin? Why would you do that to me? Her voice was a razor blade sliding through the wood of the door. It cut through the loud static in my head, leaving a clean, cold silence in its wake. I saw your face. My name. She had said my name. Kevin. It didn't sound like my name anymore. It sounded like an accusation. A verdict. I took a step back from the door. Then another. My bare heel landed on the sharp corner of a book I'd thrown earlier. I didn't feel the pain. My body was a distant thing, a machine I was no longer properly operating. I retreated until the back of my legs hit the sofa and I collapsed onto the cushions. The wrapped hand in my lap throbbed with a dull, insistent beat. A metronome counting down to nothing. She was gone. I listened for her footsteps, for the sound of her door closing, but I heard nothing. Just the low hum of the building around me. The thought that she was still out there just standing in the hallway watching my door made a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My eyes scanned the wreckage of my living room, the broken lamp, the scattered papers, the water stain on the floorboards, already starting to warp the wood. This wasn't my home. It was a cage, a cell padded with my own failures. I stayed on the sofa, a statue of a man, watching the front door as if it might burst open at any second. Time stretched and became thin. The light outside the window faded from gray afternoon to a deep, bruised purple. I didn't move to turn on a light. The shadows grew long, creeping from the corners of the room, swallowing the details of the mess until everything was just a suggestion of chaos. She's trying to trap us, a voice whispered in my head. T. His voice was no longer a vague impression. It was as clear as my own thoughts, but threaded with a cool, sharp certainty I didn't possess. She's working with them. The police. They want to put you away. She saw me, I whispered aloud into the dark room. The sound of my own voice was strange, a trespasser in the quiet. She saw what I had to do, T corrected. I did it for you. For us. People who peek get punished. It's a rule. I squeezed my eyes shut. I started pacing. A tight, three-step rotation in the small, clear space between the sofa and the television. Back and forth. Back and forth. My bare feet were silent on the floor. I was a caged animal, feeling the walls close in. The baseball bat was still leaning against the wall, a dark vertical line in the gloom. A tool. A weapon. They have red paint on my boot, I muttered, my good hand running through my hair, pulling at the roots. I'll clean it, T's voice said, full of a simple, practical confidence. We just need to be smart. We just need each other. Everyone else is a liar. Everyone else wants to hurt you. Only I'm on your side. It's always been just you and me, Kevin. My pacing stopped. I was standing in the middle of the room, my head cocked, listening to the voice that wasn't there. He was right. He had always been there. When the other kids wouldn't play with me. When Dad left. He was the only one who never left. A wave of something hot and shameful washed over me. It felt like loyalty. That's when I heard it, a sound so slight I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, dry shh from the front door. The sound of paper whispering against wood. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked tight. My breathing stopped. I stared at the dark slit of space at the bottom of the door. A white corner appeared. It pushed forward, a pale tongue sticking out into my apartment. It slid another inch, then stopped. I didn't move for a full minute. I just watched that white corner. It was a challenge, a message, a violation. Finally, I crept forward, my weight on the balls of my feet. The floorboards didn't make a sound. I was a ghost in my own home. I knelt, my knees pressing into the floor. My good hand trembled as I reached out and took hold of the paper's edge. It was a single sheet, folded in half. Standard copy paper, cool to the touch. I pulled it into the room. It was light, flimsy. I crawled back towards the faint glow coming from the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed light to see. I huddled on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, and unfolded the sheet. It was a photocopy. Grainy, with dark smudges along the edges. An obituary. From a newspaper, years old. The picture was of a smiling boy with a gap between his front teeth. He was holding a soccer ball. My vision tunneled. The air left my lungs in a rush, as if I'd been punched. I knew that face. I saw that face every time I closed my eyes. Under the photo, the text was stark and black. Liam Peterson, aged 8, passed away suddenly following a tragic accident on May 12th. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process them. It was a wall of text that meant nothing and everything. The date, the name, the word accident. They were just shapes on a page. And then I saw it. Someone had taken a pen, a red ballpoint pen, and had circled the boy's name. They had circled his age, and they had circled the date of his death. The red ink was a series of violent, angry rings drawn around the facts of my sin. Who? The word was a puff of air. Who sent this? My gaze shot back to the front door. Who was out there? Who knew? Who remembered that specific date, that specific name, and knew where I lived now? The walls of the cage weren't just closing in. They were made of my past. It's her, T hissed in my mind, his voice sharp with venom. The mother. My head was swimming. The piece of paper felt heavy in my hand, like a stone. I felt sick. I wanted to tear it up, to burn it like I had the photograph, to destroy the evidence of what I was. But I couldn't. I just stared at it, at the smiling face of the boy, whose life had ended under the wheels of my car. Then came the knock. It wasn't the hard, official rap of the police. It was softer. 3 distinct, measured taps. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, but firm, unyielding. The sound of someone who would not be ignored. My entire body went rigid. I was still on the kitchen floor, holding the obituary. A woman's voice came through the door. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson's reedy, frightened tone. This voice was lower, controlled, and sharp as broken glass. Kevin, open the door. It wasn't a request, it was a command. My blood felt like it had turned to ice water. The obituary slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the tiled floor. I know you're in there, the voice continued, its cold precision cutting through the thick wood. I saw the light in your kitchen. I'm Liam's mother. The name hit me like a physical blow. Liam's mother. The world tilted on its axis and everything slid away. The floor, the walls, my own skin. It was all gone. There was only that voice on the other side of the door. The past wasn't just a memory or a piece of paper anymore. It had a voice. It had a name. It was standing 3 feet away from me. Panic, pure and absolute, clawed its way up my throat. It was a screeching, silent thing that made my vision blur at the edges. Don't open it! T screamed inside my skull. His voice was a raw, terrified shriek, a complete contrast to his earlier coolness. It was the sound of a cornered animal. She's here to hurt you! She knows! She's going to make you pay! Don't let her in! I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, away from the door, away from that voice. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. My mind was a white-hot storm of noise, her voice. T's voice. The memory of screeching tires. They all swirled together into an unbearable vortex of sound. Then I heard a new sound. A metallic click, followed by a rattle. She was trying the doorknob. She was trying to get in. Something inside me snapped. The last frayed thread of rational thought tore apart. The fear wasn't just fear anymore. It was a physical force. A surge of adrenaline that propelled me to my feet. I wasn't Kevin anymore. I wasn't a man racked with guilt. I was just a thing trying to keep another thing out. Get out! I roared. The voice that came out of my own mouth was unrecognizable. A guttural, torn sound. I launched myself across the living room. I hit the door with my shoulder, the impact jarring my whole frame. My good hand flattened against the wood, pushing. The wrapped, burned hand slammed against it a second later, and a universe of white fire exploded up my arm. I cried out, but I didn't pull back. I used my whole body, my entire weight, as a barricade. "Get the fuck out of here!" I screamed, my face mashed against the cool, splintery wood. I could hear her on the other side. A muffled sound. Words I couldn't understand. She pushed. I felt the door give a fraction of an inch. A grunt of effort escaped my lips as I drove my feet into the floor and pushed back. It was a battle. A primal struggle through a plank of wood. My shoulder ached. My burned hand was a screaming nerve. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. Her strength was incredible, a focused, desperate pressure against the door. I could hear her breathing, ragged and angry. I could feel the vibrations of her effort traveling through the wood and into my bones. I was no longer thinking. There was only the pushing, the screaming. "Block the door. Keep her out. Keep the past out." He was screaming with me. T. Our voices were one, a single, mindless howl of terror and rage directed at the thing on the other side of the door. And then, it just stopped. The pressure vanished. The silence that rushed in was sudden and total. It was more shocking than the noise had been. I was left pushing against a door that was no longer pushing back. I stumbled forward a step as my momentum carried me. I stood there, panting, my ear pressed against the wood. My own ragged breathing was the only sound in the universe. I waited. 1 second. 2. 10. Nothing. Then, a dull, heavy thump. The sound of a body hitting the floor of the hallway. Silence again. A profound, endless quiet. I slowly, carefully, peeled myself away from the door. My body was shaking uncontrollably. My legs felt like they were about to give out. My burned hand throbbed with a pain so immense it was almost abstract. What had happened? Did she fall? Did I do something? With a tremor I couldn't control, I raised my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens showed me a curved, distorted, and utterly empty hallway. The door to Mrs. Henderson's apartment was closed. The elevator doors were shut. The dingy carpet was vacant. She was gone. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs in a long, shuddering sigh. I slid down the door, my back scraping against the wood, until I was sitting on the floor. I was exhausted, drained. I dropped my head into my hands. My good hand was slick with sweat. My eyes fell on the floor in front of me. The white piece of paper I had dropped was lying there, face up, by the edge of the kitchen doorway. The obituary. Liam Peterson, aged 8. I stared at it. Something was different. It wasn't just the circles anymore. There was more red ink on the page. New writing, small, neat block letters, just below the circled name of the dead boy. My hand shook as I reached out and picked it up. I held it close to my face in the dim light. The ink was dark and looked damp. It had been written just moments ago. 4 words. Now we're even. The paper was light in my hand, but it felt like it was pinning me to the floor. The 4 words swam in front of my eyes. Now we're even. The red ink was a smear, still wet. It had been written on the other side of the door. Moments ago. My throat was closed. I tried to swallow, but there was nothing to swallow. I scrambled backward, crab walking on my good hand and my heels, pushing myself away from the door. My back hit the kitchen cabinets with a hard thud that rattled the dishes inside. I didn't care. I just needed distance. I kept pushing, my legs kicking out, until I was wedged into the corner where the counter met the wall. A small, tight space. Safe. The obituary had fallen face up on the linoleum. The smiling face of Liam Peterson looked up at the ceiling. The red circles. The red words. What did she do? What did T do? The thoughts were a tangled wire in my head. I pushed on the door. I screamed at her. But I didn't go out there. I didn't touch her. I stayed in here. I took care of it, T's voice said. It wasn't a scream anymore. It was calm. A flat, simple statement inside my own skull. It was my voice, but clean, without the shaking. She was going to hurt us. I stopped her. What did you do? I whispered to the empty room. My voice was a dry rasp. What did you do? My eyes were locked on the door. The peephole was a dark circle, a blind eye. I imagined her body out there in the hallway. The thump. The sound of meat and bone hitting the cheap carpet. Had I imagined it? Had he? My gaze drifted across the floor, past the obituary, and landed on my phone. It was lying screened down near the sofa, where I'd dropped it hours ago. Or days. I didn't know. The battery had been dead for a long time. As I stared at it, the screen lit up. A cold shock went through me. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a notification. The screen just came to life, a bright white rectangle in the gloom. And then, a video started playing. There was no sound at first, just a shaky, pixelated image. My stomach twisted. The camera angle was low, aimed upward. I could see the textured ceiling of the hallway outside my apartment. My hallway, the light fixture with the dead fly in it. The camera was unsteady, swaying with the rhythm of someone's breathing. It was pointed at my door. Then it panned, a jerky movement, to the door of Mrs. Henderson's apartment. A figure stepped into the frame. The woman, Liam's mother. She stood there for a second, her back to the camera. I could see the tension in her shoulders. She looked at my door. Then she took a half step back, as if she heard something. Her head turned slightly. Her eyes went wide. She was looking directly at the spot where the camera had to be. At me. Her mouth opened, but the video was silent. It was like watching a movie on mute. Fear. I saw pure, undiluted fear on her face. It was the face of someone looking at a monster. She stumbled backward again. Her heel caught on nothing. On the air. She flailed. Her arms pinwheeling. Her back hit the wall next to Mrs. Henderson's door, and she slid down to the floor, her legs crumpled beneath her. She didn't get up. She just lay there, staring at the empty space in front of her. The video wasn't showing me what had happened. It was showing me what hadn't happened. There was no one there. No one pushed her. She was recoiling from something invisible. Something she could see but the camera couldn't. My heart hammered against my ribs. A low, sick feeling started to climb up from my gut. Then the camera in the video moved. It lurched downward, a sudden, sickening drop. The warped image of the hallway carpet filled the screen for a second, then it focused. It focused on a hand. The hand holding the phone. My hand. I could see the faint scars on the knuckles. I could see the dirt under the fingernails. My hand. It was holding my phone, recording. And as I watched on the screen, frozen in my corner, the fingers of the hand in the video uncurled. Slowly. Deliberately. Resting in the palm was a screwdriver. A small one, from the cheap toolkit under the sink. The Phillips head was clean, but the point was sharp. It glinted in the dim hallway light. The fingers in the video curled around it again, hiding it from view. The shot held on the hand for a long, terrible moment. Then, T's voice filled my head again, laced with a smug, chilling pride. The sound that played wasn't from the phone's speaker. It was inside me. See? No one saw a thing. She just tripped. All they have is her scream, and they'll think she's the crazy one. A noise ripped out of my throat. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, animal sound of denial. My arm shot out. I grabbed the television remote off the floor and hurled it. It flew across the room and smashed into my phone. The screen went black. The remote clattered to the floor. Silence. I stared at my own hands. My good hand and the one wrapped in stained gauze. They were my hands. I controlled them. They did what I told them to. But I hadn't been out there. I was in here. I was pushing against the door. I remembered the pain in my shoulder. I remembered the fire in my burned hand. I was here. The whole time. I was here, wasn't I? The memory felt thin, frayed at the edges, the screaming, the pushing, and that blank spot. The moment the pressure on the other side of the door just vanished. The heavy sound that followed. And then I heard it. A new sound. Faint, from far away. A siren. It was a high, thin wail, rising and falling. Coming closer. They were coming. Of course they were coming. The mother. She would have screamed. She would have called them. And they would come here. To my door. They would find the obituary. They would ask about the red paint on my boot. They would find her. The siren grew louder, a second one joining it. They were close now. A few blocks away. The sound echoed off the buildings, a promise of flashing lights and hard questions. Panic surged through me. It was a jolt of electricity that got me on my feet. The cage was real now. The walls were sirens and uniforms. Run. The thought was a single, clean command. I scrambled through the living room, kicking aside books and broken glass. I needed my wallet, my keys, my jacket. I found the jacket on the floor, tangled with the cord from the broken lamp. I ripped it free. Wallet was in the pocket. Keys. I had them. I needed a bag. I ran into the bedroom. The closet. I pulled out my old gym bag and started throwing things into it. A few t-shirts. Socks. A pair of jeans. My movements were clumsy. Panicked. I was just grabbing, stuffing. The wail of the sirens was right outside now, bouncing off the brick walls of the alley. They were here. I had to be faster. I zipped the bag, the sound loud in the small room. The window. It opened onto the fire escape. It was the only way out. I shoved the window sash up. It was stuck. Painted shut. Fuck! The word burst from my lips. I put my shoulder into it, pushing up with all my strength. The wood groaned. I slammed the heel of my good hand against the frame. Once. Twice. A crackle of dry paint, and the window shot up with a screech of tortured wood. Cold night air flooded the room, smelling of dumpsters and rain. I threw the bag out first. It landed on the iron grating with a soft thump. I put one leg over the sill, my knee pressing into the cold metal of the fire escape. The sirens cut out, one after the other. A sudden, heavy quiet fell over the street below. A car door slammed shut. Then another. They were here. They were in the building. I had to go. Now. I pulled my other leg through, my feet finding the solid platform of the fire escape. I was out. I was free. I stood there for a second, breathing hard, my back to the window. I started to turn, to hurry down the ladder. But I stopped. I don't know why. A final, morbid curiosity. I risked a glance back into my apartment. Back into the cage. My eyes went to the full-length mirror hanging on the back of the bedroom door, and I saw my reflection. Except it wasn't me. The figure in the mirror was small. A boy. Maybe 7 or 8 years old. He was wearing my jacket, which hung off his tiny frame like a trench coat. He was wearing my jeans, pulled around his ankles. He stood in the middle of my bedroom, in the exact spot I had just been standing. He was looking right at me. Through the window, through the glass of the mirror. His face was pale in the dim light. His hair was my hair. His eyes were my eyes. He wasn't scared, he wasn't panicked. He raised a small hand. My hand. And he gave me a little wave. A slow, simple back and forth movement. Then, he smiled. It was a wide, contented smile. The smile of a job well done. Of a game won. And as the first heavy footsteps pounded on the carpet in the hallway outside my apartment door, the boy in the mirror turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the room. He left me alone on the fire escape, looking at an empty reflection. The grating of the fire escape was the last solid thing I felt. Then there was shouting. Blue and red lights painted the brick walls of the alley in frantic strobing flashes. A weight hit my back. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. My face scraped against the dirty asphalt of the alley. The taste of grit and old rain filled my mouth. A knee pressed into my spine, hard. The cold bite of metal cinched around my wrists. Now I sat on a different kind of metal. A chair, bolted to the floor. The room was a box of cinder blocks painted a pale, sickly green. The air was cool and still, humming with the sound of the fluorescent light overhead. A single water stain, a faded brown continent marred one of the ceiling tiles. I stared at it. I traced its borders with my eyes. Over and over. Anything to not look at the man sitting across the small steel table from me. My good hand trembled on my knee. The other, swaddled in gauze now stained with grime from the alley, throbbed with a slow, deep beat, like a second heart. I didn't do anything, I said. My voice was a whisper in the quiet room. It was him. It was T. The man didn't react. He was older, hair graying at the temples, wearing a plain button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up his forearms. He just watched me. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't anything. It was like the lens of a camera. Recording. I told him to stop. I tried to hold the door shut. The words came out, a familiar script. I'd been playing it in my head since the cuffs went on. He's too strong. He did it, not me. The man finally moved. He reached for a thick manila folder on the table next to him. The sound of his fingers on the paper was loud. He opened it. He didn't look inside. He just kept his eyes on me. T, he said. His voice was flat. Just a statement of a word. Your friend. He's not my friend. I snapped. The tremor in my hand got worse. He's a thing. It follows me. It makes me do things. The detective slid something across the table. It wasn't a crime scene photo. It was a piece of paper, yellowed with age, protected by a plastic sleeve. A page from a book. A children's journal, the kind with blue and red lines. The handwriting was a clumsy, childish scrawl in pencil. My scrawl. I remembered the feel of that pencil, the fat barrel of it in my small hand. The drawing took up most of the page. It was me, a stick figure with a wild scribble of black hair. And next to me, another figure. It was just an outline, darker, pressed hard into the paper, filled in with angry, chaotic shading. Beneath it, the words were big, leaning to one side. T is mad today. T says Mark should be punished for not sharing his toys. A cold line traced its way down my spine. The name. Mark. Liam Peterson's older brother. He'd lived 2 doors down in the old house. I hadn't thought of him in 20 years. I don't. I started, but my throat was tight. The detective ignored me. He reached into the folder again. He pulled out another plastic-sleeved document. It was a newspaper clipping. The ink was faded. The headline was small, buried in a local news section. Local boy injured in fall. I didn't have to read the article. I knew. Mark Peterson. He'd fallen down the basement stairs. A mysterious accident. He broke his arm in 2 places. I remembered his white cast, the way all the other kids signed it. I remembered standing at the edge of the playground, watching, my stomach twisting. T had been quiet that week. Happy. T has always been there to take the blame, hasn't he, Cole? The detective's voice was still level, still devoid of judgment. It was worse than an accusation. It was a fact. Since you were a child. A convenient shadow to put things on. The broken window. The neighbor's cat. The boy who fell down the stairs. My breathing was fast now. Shallow gasps. The air didn't seem to have any oxygen in it. The walls of the green room felt closer. The water stain on the ceiling tile pulsed with my vision. T wasn't a shadow. He was real. I saw him in the mirror. I heard his voice. He was there in the hallway. He pushed her. No, I whispered. No, you don't understand. He's real. I think I do understand, Cole. The detective leaned forward a fraction of an inch. The movement was so small, but it felt like the whole room tilted toward me. I understand that a boy named Liam died in a car you were driving. I understand that his mother, in her grief, put his obituary on your door. An act of pure pain. And I understand that she is now in a hospital with a concussion and a puncture wound in her hand. He let the words hang in the air. Each one was a stone, dropping into a deep well inside me. He wasn't telling a story. He was listing an inventory of my life. T was a good excuse when you were 7, Cole. It's not a good excuse when you're 27. He closed the manila folder. The sound was a soft final thump. It's over. It was him. The words tore out of me, louder this time. I was looking at the detective, but I was talking to the empty corner of the room, to the space over his shoulder. He recorded it on my phone. He showed me. He was there. She was scared of him. The detective's expression didn't change. He simply reached over and pulled a laptop onto the table. It was black. Standard issue. He opened it. He tapped a key. The screen came to life, illuminating his face from below. He turned it to face me. We pulled the security footage from the hallway, he said. Let's see who she was scared of. He clicked the mouse. The image was grainy, the colors washed out under the cheap hallway light. The camera angle was high. From a corner near the ceiling, I could see my door. I could see Mrs. Henderson's door across the hall. It was exactly as I'd seen it in my nightmares. Then, she stepped into the frame. Liam's mother. She looked smaller on the screen. She taped the obituary to my door. Her movements were slow, weighted with a sorrow so heavy it seemed to bend her spine. She finished. She stepped back, She looked at the door. Her mouth was a tight line of grief. Then, she froze. Her head tilted, as if listening to something. A sound I couldn't hear on the silent video. My door opened. Just a crack. A sliver of blackness. It wasn't T. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a small boy. It was me. I could see my face in the gap. My eye, wide and wild. My hair, a mess. I looked like a cornered animal. My hand, my good hand, shot out through the opening. It was holding something. Something small and metal. It glinted. The screwdriver. The video showed my arm lunging. It showed the point of the screwdriver burying itself in the back of her hand, the one she had raised as if to knock again. It was a quick, vicious movement. A jab. Her reaction was pure shock. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. It wasn't the face of someone seeing a monster. It was the face of someone being stabbed. She stumbled back, clutching her hand, her gaze locked on the gap in my door. She tripped, her heel catching on nothing, her balance lost to pain and panic. She hit the opposite wall and slid to the floor. The video showed my door closing. The hallway was empty again, save for the woman crumpled on the carpet. The detective clicked the mouse. The screen went black. "There is no T here, Cole," the detective's voice said, cutting through the humming silence. "There's no one else in the hallway. No one pushed her. No one whispered to her. There's only you." I stared at the black screen, at my own faint reflection in it. The animal eyes. The contorted face. It wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I was inside. I was pushing against the door. I felt the wood pressing into my shoulder. I felt the burn in my hand. The memory was so clear. The splinters. The pain. "No!" The sound ripped from my throat, raw and broken. "No, that's not me. He made me. He was in my head. It's a trick. It's his trick." I launched myself forward, or tried to. The chair held me fast. My body slammed against the steel table. The laptop slid. I clawed at my own head, my fingers digging into my scalp, trying to tear him out, trying to get to the voice, to the thing that lived behind my eyes. It was him. Not me. Not me. Not me. The words became a chant, a meaningless howl. My world had been a thin sheet of ice over a black ocean, and the detective had just stomped on it with a steel-toed boot. I was falling. The video, the diary, the newspaper clipping, they weren't evidence. They were the shards of ice I was grabbing at as I went down into the cold. Nothing made sense. My memory was a lie. The reflection in the mirror was a lie. My own hands were liars. Then, as suddenly as it began, the screaming stopped. The echo of it died in the green room. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I lowered my hands from my head. I let them fall to the table. The trembling was gone. A deep quiet settled inside me. The panic was gone. The fear was gone. There was no more falling. I had landed. Slowly, I lifted my head. I looked at the detective. My focus was sharp. The room was just a room. The man was just a man. Everything was clear now. My eyes met his. I held his gaze, and I felt the corners of my mouth lift. My voice, when I spoke, was different. It wasn't the ragged whisper of a terrified man. It was light, clear, untroubled. It was the voice of a child who knows he won't get in trouble. "You got the wrong guy, mister," I said. "Cole's a good boy. He wouldn't hurt a fly." I leaned forward, the chains on the chair rattling softly. "I'm the one who did it." A smile spread across my face, wide and content. The smile of a job well done, of a game won. The walls were soft. That was the first thing. Not padded like in the movies, but a dense, seamless material that gave slightly when I pressed my back against it. The color was a clean, sterile off-white, the kind that doesn't show scuffs. The floor was the same. A seamless, rubbery surface. There were no corners in the room. The walls flowed into the floor and ceiling in smooth, gentle curves. There was a bed, but it wasn't a bed. It was a slab of the same soft material, rising out of the floor. No sheets. No pillow. The light came from a flat panel in the ceiling. It didn't hum. It just glowed. A steady, shadowless light that made the room feel like it had no depth. It smelled of bleach and something else. Something clean and bland. Like nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed slab, my bare feet resting on the soft floor. My hands were in my lap. The gauze was gone from my left hand. The small puncture wound was a dark pink circle, neat and clean. The tremor was gone. My fingers were still. I swung my legs, just a little, a slow, easy rhythm. Back and forth. A tune came into my head. I started to hum it. Low, under my breath. Row, row, row your boat. The sound was small in the featureless room, gently down the stream. A soft click echoed from the wall. I didn't turn my head. I kept humming. My legs kept swinging. The sound of shoes, soft-soled and quiet, squeaked on the floor. I watched my feet. Brown pants came into my view. Black shoes. The person sat down on a simple stool made of the same white material, a few feet away from me. It had been brought into the room. It was the only separate object here. I kept humming. Merrily, 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 merrily. Hello, Cole. The voice was a woman's. It was low and calm. It didn't expect an answer. I kept humming. The song finished. I started it again from the beginning. Row, row, row your boat. The swinging of my legs was a perfect metronome. Steady and untroubled. I could feel her watching me. It wasn't like the detective's stare. His was a camera lens, collecting data. This was different. This was a searching gaze, looking for something. A piece of paper rustled. The sound of a pen cap being removed. A tiny click. I'm Dr. Eris, she said. We're going to talk for a little while. My humming didn't stop. I looked at the wall opposite me. It was just a blank, white expanse. An endless page. My legs swung. The rhythm was all that mattered. There was a long period of quiet. Just the sound of my humming and the gentle squeak of my feet brushing against the floor. She was waiting. I knew how to wait. I was very good at it. Finally, she spoke again. Her voice was even softer this time. A minor adjustment. A key being tried in a different lock. Hello, T. The humming stopped. My legs stopped swinging. The sudden absence of the sound was louder than the humming had been. The room was heavy with it. Slowly, I lifted my head. I hadn't seen her before. She was older than the detective. Her hair was pulled back from her face. She wore simple glasses. She held a pen and a clipboard in her lap, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me. Her expression was neutral. A professional mask. But her eyes, behind the glasses, were sharp. They were trying to see past my face, trying to see the wiring underneath. I let a smile spread across my lips. It was an easy smile, the kind you give a teacher you like. It felt natural. It made the muscles around my eyes crinkle. Hi, doctor, I said. My voice was clear. Light. The gravel and the panic from the other room were gone. That was Cole's voice. This one was mine. Cole's sleeping now. He's very tired. Dr. Eris didn't write anything down. Her knuckles were a little white where she held the pen. A tiny detail. I noticed details like that. Tired? She prompted, her voice still a carefully modulated calm. Oh yes, I said, my smile widening a little. He cries so much, all the time. About the car, about the boy, about the woman. Crying and crying. It's boring. I let out a little puff of air, a sigh of childish exasperation. The expression didn't feel strange on this face. It felt right. This face, this body. It was just the car I drove. I knew how all the buttons worked. And you don't feel sad about those things? She asked. I considered the question. I tilted my head, looking up at the light panel. Sad? No. Why would I be sad? They were games. But Cole doesn't like my games. He always wants to spoil the fun. He wants to say sorry. He wants to tell. He's very weak. I brought my gaze back to her. My smile was gone now, replaced by a look of serious, confidential explanation, like a child explaining the rules of the playground. He needs me to be strong for him. Did you need to be strong when you hurt Mrs. Henderson? Liam's mommy, I corrected her, my voice matter of fact. She was making Cole sad. She put a sad paper on our door. It made him cry inside my head. I don't like it when he cries. It's noisy. I held up my left hand, showing her the small healing wound. He tried to stop me. He pushed on the door from the inside. He hurt our hand. I looked at the mark, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing my face. See? He broke our toy. That's what he does. He breaks things. The screwdriver was a toy? Dr. Eris asked. The pen in her hand still hadn't moved. It was a pointy stick, I said. It was for the game. The game was called Knock Knock. Her face gave nothing away. It was a well-trained face. But her stillness was a kind of reaction. She was a statue, absorbing every word. And why did you play these games, T? She asked. The question was the one she had been waiting to ask. The main one. Why did you do all of those things? I leaned forward. The movement was fluid. I rested my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together. I looked right into her eyes. The professional mask, the glasses, none of it mattered. I saw the person behind it. The curious, frightened person. Because it was fun, I whispered. The whisper was a secret between us. It's fun to see what happens. It's fun to push things and see if they fall. Cole never wants to push. He's afraid of the noise it makes when it breaks. I leaned back again, the smile returning. But I like the noise. I looked past her, toward the gentle curve where the wall met the ceiling. Up there, a small, dark hemisphere was embedded in the soft white material. A black, unblinking eye. A camera. He doesn't want to be here, I said, my voice normal again, conversational. Cole, I mean. He's scared. He wants to go home. He wants to say he's sorry, and for everything to be okay again. I shook my head slowly, a gesture of pity. He doesn't understand. We are home. My eyes stayed locked on the camera. I was talking to her, but I was looking at it. At whoever was on the other side. The detectives. The other doctors. The audience. We just have a new room to play in. A new friend, too. My gaze flicked back to Dr. Eris for a second, then returned to the camera. Cole is the one who has to be sorry. I'm the one who gets to have fun. We're a good team. I held that stare for a long moment, letting them watch me. Letting them see the calm, the clarity, the total absence of regret. We're best friends, I said softly to the camera. We're one. Then I winked. A quick, deliberate closing and opening of my left eye. A shared secret. A promise of more games to come. And in the silent, shadowless room, the image burned itself into the air, a truth colder and harder than any steel table or concrete wall. The memory wasn't Cole's to twist. It wasn't mine to invent. It just was. The sound of rain, not a gentle shower but a hard, percussive drumming on the car roof. The frantic rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers trying to keep up. Smears of red and white light from the taillights of a distant car painting the wet asphalt. The engine ticked. The car was stopped crookedly on the shoulder of the road. The door flew open, and Cole stumbled out. He didn't have a coat. The cold rain soaked his shirt in seconds. He gasped for air, his hands on his knees, his body heaving. Steam plumed from his mouth. He took a few steps forward, his shoes splashing in a puddle. There, in the weak cone of the headlights, was a bicycle. Twisted metal. One wheel still spinning slowly, squeaking with each rotation. And a few feet beyond it, a small shape, a lump of clothes. A child's jacket. Cole made a sound. A choked, animal noise of negation. He ran forward, tripping, catching himself. He fell to his knees on the wet road beside the boy. Liam. Oh God. No, 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 no. The words were a prayer, a plea. He reached out a trembling hand, then pulled it back. He couldn't touch him. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers clumsy and wet. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up his face, a mask of pure horror. His eyes were wide, streaming with tears that mixed with the rain. His jaw was slack. His thumb shook over the screen, over the green icon to dial 911. He was trying to press it. His whole body was trembling, seized by a quake of shock and guilt. He was just a boy himself, a terrified boy who had made a terrible mistake. He was going to call. He was going to confess. He was going to accept what he had done. And then it stopped. The trembling ceased. The hand holding the phone grew steady. The choked sobs caught in his throat and died. His head, which had been bowed in grief, slowly lifted. His eyes, fixed on the small body on the road, lost their panicked focus. The tears still tracked through the grime on his face, but they were just water now. His expression shifted. The slack-jawed horror receded. His lips pressed together into a firm, thin line. His eyes narrowed. The raw emotion was wiped away, leaving behind a hard, flat surface. It was a change as total and as swift as a switch being flipped. The person who had stumbled out of the car was gone. This new person stood up. The movement was deliberate, calm. He looked down at the boy on the asphalt for one long, unblinking moment. There was no sadness in his gaze, no panic. There was only an assessment, an observation of a fact. He turned, walked back to the car with a steady gait. He got into the driver's seat, the wetness from his clothes seeping into the fabric. He placed the phone, its screen still glowing, on the passenger seat. He didn't look at it. He put his hands on the steering wheel. He put the car in drive. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He drove away, the red taillights shrinking into the rain-swept darkness, leaving the twisted bicycle and the small, still shape alone on the empty road. The squeaking of the spinning wheel was the only sound left to mark what had happened. The devil wasn't an excuse created in the aftermath to bear the guilt. The devil was the one who was strong enough to drive away.